Jury's all present and count for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Kane. You can be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome back. So we are moving forward with the trial. We seem to be moving backwards with Mother Nature. It's a bit chilly out there. So again, great day to be indoors. We don't really have a fire going here, but we've got all the sparks of this trial to keep you warm. Appreciate you all being on time. We were on time as well in terms of being here, but there was more to work through than I had anticipated because of where we are in the proceedings. It's my understanding, and I'll ask Mr. Rucker in a moment, that the state is going to present a few rebuttal witnesses. The state is entitled to present a rebuttal case if the defense presents a case, which the defense did after the defense rest, which is where we are, because the defense rested on Friday. It's my understanding that each of the three witnesses most of the witnesses that the state's going to call, may have testified before. You've seen them before. And for the most part, that's unremarkable. But there's one witness who I think may be the next witness the state calls, Mr. Grover. And if you remember him, great. Otherwise, you're going to meet Mr. Grover again. And he is someone, we're not calling Mr. Grover?
Not first.
Okay.
Dr. Pressman, and we'll make a decision with respect to Mr. Grover in light of our decision.
Okay. Well, there you go. So all those things that I said are for the most part true. You may see some familiar faces in here, but the first witness the state's going to call is not someone you've met before. When the state is done with its rebuttal, I'll see if there's what's called a rebuttal. The defense has the right to say, well, wait a minute, and we'll work through that. But the forecast I shared with you all on Friday remains in place, even though we're starting after 10 rather than right at 9, is that we'll wrap up the evidence today and then tomorrow morning start with closing arguments. So we remain on schedule. And with that, Mr. Rucker, Mr. Abate.
Yes, Your Honor. The state will call Dr. Mark Rucker.
Can you raise your right hand for me, sir? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give to the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir? You got it?
I do.
All right, you may be seated. Please state and spell your name for the court.
First name is Mark with a K. Middle initial R. Pressman, Pressman.
Good morning, Dr. Pressman.
Good morning.
If you could turn and introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi. Good morning. Dr. Mark Pressman.
And Dr. Pressman, how are you currently employed?
I am employed, I guess, part-time at the Lankanaw Medical Center, what we call sleep medicine services, sleep laboratory, which is in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. I'm also this semester teaching a course at the Villanova School of Law. Actually, at this very moment, I should be teaching.
Hopefully your students are watching.
Oh, they're sending me emails about what to do with the presentations they were supposed to make today.
Well, we thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
In the past, I guess, how are you employed?
I've always been employed by sleep disorder centers in hospital settings, going back to, I guess, 1978, 40 years.
And tell the jury a little bit about your educational background to be employed at these sleep disorder centers for the last 40 years.
Well, I guess you'd call me a second-generation sleep expert. Sleep medicine is sort of a new field. I trained at the very first accredited sleep disorder center in Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. And because I had that unique experience, I got hired away to help set up a new sleep center in the Philadelphia area. And I've been in the Philadelphia area ever since.
And as to your education, what degrees do you hold?
I have a Bachelor of Science, a Master's degree of Science, and a PhD in Experimental Psychology. although my focus was I trained specifically to be a sleep researcher.
And can you tell the jury a little bit about what you had to do to make that your focus, I guess, of your education and for your PhD?
Well, my graduate school, the Faircroft Graduate School of Psychology, was affiliated with the Montefiore, medical center now, and they had one of the few psychologists who was practicing what we now call sleep medicine. So I actually, from the very beginning of my graduate career, I volunteered at the hospital, which is way up in the Bronx. A lot of late nights on the subway. And I saw patients with them, attended their conferences, and I also started to work as what we call a sleep technician. So eventually I would work Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights in the laboratory, and then go to graduate school the rest of the week.
Okay. Now, I know you mentioned earlier that you were a professor currently, a part-time professor currently at the Villanova School of Law. What are you teaching at the Villanova School of Law?
The course is just called Psychology and Law. I'm not a lawyer. I believe I'm the only member of the faculty who's not a lawyer. And so it deals with all sorts of legal issues that have involved psychology. Today, I would have been giving a lecture about eyewitness identification, police lineups, what the psychology of that is, how the law has changed over the last 10 years in terms of how it's done.
Okay. And as part of your, studies that you teach at the Villanova School of Law, does any of that have to do with sleep-related, disorders or defenses?
Right. Well, a big part of it has to do with what is called mental health law. I guess it starts with things like what is insanity and what is not. I teach about what are called automatisms. Automatisms are behaviors done without essentially conscious thought. I teach about sleepwalking, REM behavior disorder, drowsy driving, anything that has sort of an interesting psychological side to it and an interesting legal side to it.
Now, before holding that position at the Villanova School of Law, were you a professor at any other institutions as it relates to sleep medicine or sleep disorders?
Right. I'm currently a clinical professor of medicine at the Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. Jefferson and my hospital were affiliated for many, many years, although no longer. And I'm also a clinical professor at the Lankanaugh Institute for Medical Research. It's a larger research institute attached to the hospital that has funded a number of research projects that I conduct with other members of the hospital staff.
And does your, status or qualifications to teach those courses while those institutions relate back to the fact that you're a licensed psychologist?
Not exactly. I mean, in order to be on the staff of the hospital, I have to be a licensed psychologist. But in order to have what's called the privilege, hospitals basically don't let any doctor walk in the door and do whatever they want. They have to apply for specific privileges. And in my case, I have the privilege of diagnosing and treating patients with sleep disorders, doing in-hospital consultations, and reviewing and interpreting sleep studies in the sleep laboratory.
And in the last 38 to 40 years of your career, have you had an opportunity to diagnose and treat patients, and evaluate patients for sleep disorders?
Yes, I think overall, this is now 40 years, so over 20,000 patients. This is all done, of course, as what we call multidisciplinary. I work very closely with medical doctors, nurses, other specialists as part of this. and substantial number of them had parasomnias of one sort or another. Estimate 500 to 750.
And why would you bring that, or did you bring that topic up? Can you tell the jury what a parasomnia is?
Well, a parasomnia is it's usually a behavior of some kind that comes out of sleep or occurs in the transition to or from sleep. So as you fall asleep or as you wake up, it can occur during dreaming sleep, REM sleep, or during deep sleep.
Okay. And as part of your career, have you had the opportunity to publish books and or articles in journals?
Yes, I have it's close to 100 articles, book chapters, edited books, and I have one complete book coming out in about a month.
Okay. And what's the focus of that book?
The title is Sleepwalking, Criminal Behavior, and Reliable Scientific Evidence. Surefire New York Times bestseller, I'm sure.
We will all go out and buy it.
Oh yeah, just the title itself.
Now, of the publications, the articles that you just spoke of, has the focus been on parasomnias as you
Right, that's been my specialty, I guess, for the last 30 years. Before that, I focused on the disorder called narcolepsy. Actually did my master's thesis and my PhD thesis about narcolepsy.
And I believe you said currently you are acting as a part-time professor. Are you also doing any forensic consulting or testifying?
Yes, I'm available to the prosecution and the defense for any case involving sleep, sleep disorders, sleep deprivation. Although most of the cases involve defenses of sleepwalking, confusional arousals, and the variants of them, such as sexual behavior in sleep or sleep-related violence. There's all sorts of variations on the theme.
And in those times that you've testified, have you been qualified as an expert in sleep disorders, and parasomnias?
Yes, I have.
And here in the United States or in other places?
I've testified in I think 20 different states in the United States. Also, I've done, I think, almost 10 military court-martials, mostly for the Navy in Norfolk, Virginia. I've also testified in the 90s. I testified quite a lot in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and I testified from time to time in Canada.
Your Honor, at this time the state is going to tender Dr. Mark Pressman as an expert in the field of sleep disorders, and parasomnias.
No objection.
Okay. Dr. Pressman, you are qualified as an expert for the purposes of these proceedings in the field of sleep disorder, and parasomnia.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Dr. Pressman, we've talked a little bit about, I guess, what parasomnias are. Are there different types of parasomnias?
Yes, there are two major categories of parasomnias.
And what are those?
Those that occur during rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, and those that occur in sleep that is not REM sleep. It's usually just called non-REM sleep, although usually in the deeper stages of non-REM sleep. There are actually 3 stages of REM sleep: very light, sort of intermediate, and deep.
Okay. And of those parasomnias is REM behavior disorder. What type of parasomnias are?
Well, as the name suggests, it occurs during REM sleep, but it's the result of a very unusual problem in the brain of these individuals.
Now, have you had an opportunity to review the police report and the interview of Mr. McIver And for this case,
Yes, I have.
have you also had an opportunity to review the Mayo medical records, I think from 2004 to 2009 for Mr. McIver,
Yes, I have.
as well as the sleep study that was done by Dr. Rye in January of 2018?
Yes.
Okay. And for the January of 2018 sleep study, Dr. Rye, did you review the video of the polysomnogram and the multi-sleep latency test that was done for a defendant?
Right. Well, it's actually video plus, the tracing. It's like when you see on TV, they're doing an EEG and there's all these little lines going. That's what the sleep study looks like. And you have to be trained in order to interpret what all those squiggly lines mean.
Okay. And when you describe the squiggly lines, is that the raw data that is produced from, I guess, the electrodes that are placed on the defendant's body?
Right, so they're on the surface of the body. They're not, sticking you or anything.
Right.
No needles. And we have to tell the patients all the time. And so they're non-invasive, and there's quite a lot of them, up to 20 different sensors. We're mainly interested in the sensors that are on the head. We measure the brain waves, eye movements, and muscle tone, usually at the chin.
Now, when diagnosing or attempting to diagnose or determine if there is not a diagnosis of a sleep disorder, is there a book or manual that members in your community look to or follow?
Yeah, we usually use the International Classification of Sleep Disorders. This is the third version. This was published in 2014. It's actually, if you work in a accredited sleep disorder center, you are required to use it.
And did you have a part in writing the chapter on parasomnias?
Yes, as I said, this is version 3. Version 2, I believe, was 2004. It's quite a long time since it had been updated. And 3, I guess maybe 5 years ago, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, that's the national body in the United States for sleep and sleep specialists and sleep centers, decided we should keep up with the science. And I was recruited along with two other sleep specialists to review the old version, decide what was no longer, up to date, and review the science that had occurred since 2004. Actually, there were over 1,500 new scientific studies about parasomnias that we had to go through and decide whether we should include them in the book. And then I assisted in writing the first draft of the current version, mostly the sections on what we call non-REM parasomnias, or also called disorders of arousal.
And when we're talking about the parasomnia REM behavioral disorder, or RBD, does alcohol have an effect on that disorder?
It would only have the effect of delaying its occurrence. REM behavior disorder is notable for the absence of the usual, it's not really paralysis. The people who are in dreaming sleep and REM sleep do not have the use of their voluntary muscles, their arms, their legs. They can't control them. It's not really paralysis, but essentially it's the same thing. Your lungs work, your heart works, things that don't require your control of your brain still work. But otherwise, it's just like normal REM sleep. And we know that alcohol has a distinct effect on REM sleep. It delays it, or if you have enough alcohol, it will even suppress it. So someone who's an alcoholic, for instance, may have no REM sleep at all because it's being suppressed by the alcohol.
Okay. And typically, how long does it take to get to REM sleep, where you can experience REM behavioral disorder?
Well, it varies by age, of course, but say in a young adult, it would be about 70 to 90 minutes. That's when REM sleep first occurs after you fall asleep. I mean, typically, when you fall asleep, you go into light sleep, and then intermediate sleep, called stage 2 sleep, and then into deep sleep, and you stay down there for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then you go back to intermediate sleep, and only after the cycle is completed do you first go to dreaming sleep, to REM sleep.
And you said that you looked at the data as well as the video of the defendant's polysomnogram. From that, how long did it take the defendant to reach REM sleep in his 2018 sleep study?
What we call the REM latency was 64 minutes. So he fell asleep, and then 64 minutes later was the first time we saw signs of REM sleep.
Now, what is, what is a disorder of arousal or confusional arousal?
Right, so confusional arousal is one of 3 parasomnias. They all occur in non-REM sleep, not REM sleep, non-REM sleep. And they're also called disorders of arousal because of how they occur. Until probably for thousands of years, until 1964, it was thought that sleepwalkers were acting out their dreams. Okay? That's what everyone thought. And in 1964, the very first modern sleep laboratories started to function, and they brought some, actually they were, I guess they were 12-year-old, 13-year-old sleepwalkers, known sleepwalkers, into the laboratory, fully expecting to see that they did their sleepwalking out of REM sleep. But instead, what they saw was when they reached very deep sleep, there was a partial arousal, meaning it's sort of like a little piece of wakefulness. And in most individuals, either you would just sleep right through it, wouldn't have any effect, or you'd wake up completely. But in these individuals, they sort of got caught in the middle. They were not really asleep, they were not really awake, and it's in this sort of state that they got out of bed and started sleepwalking. So that was coined a disorder of arousal. And the same thing is true for confusional arousal. Actually, there's technically no difference between confusional arousal and sleepwalking. They both have exactly the same problem in their brain. Okay?
Okay. And is there a relationship between REM behavioral disorder and confusional arousal?
No, there's no relationship at all. They're completely different. One is REM sleep, and we know very well the problems of the brain of someone with REM behavior disorder. A person with confusional arousal does not have those problems in the brain, and confusional arousals only occur in deep sleep, usually in the early part of the night.
Okay, and how long does it typically take to get to deep sleep?
Again, it depends on your age and other factors, but typically 40 or 50 minutes or longer, at least. It depends on how well you've slept. If you're sleep deprived, maybe a little bit earlier. If you're not sleep deprived, maybe a little bit later. There are lots of things that can affect the timing.
Okay. And did you have the opportunity to read Dr. Rye's report that he did for this case?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall that he referenced an article from the Journal of Neurology that he talked about the relationship between REM behavioral disorder and confusion arousal?
Yes, I've read it as well.
And tell the jury a little bit about that study in that article.
Well, there's a study that was done at Stanford University. There's a researcher there, actually a French gentleman by the name of Ohayon, who has a Yes, basically it's like a telemarketing center. I mean, just like the people who call you and try and sell you things, he does studies where they call people and try and get information about sleep and sleep disorders. So he called, I don't know the number, but a very large number of individuals and questioned them about what he's calling a confusional arousal. So what are the factors related to it? What factors are associated with it? And found an awful lot, there's a lot of factors that he found. But one of the things that he said was that if you have a history of a parasomnia, your chance of having confusional arousal is greatly increased.
And REM behavior disorder, you said is a parasomnia?
It is parasomnia.
Is it, I guess, why would it be unlikely to suffer from both confusional arousal and REM behavior disorder?
Well, because they're completely different times. As I said, actually in the article, Dr. Ohoyan does not distinguish between, say, sleepwalking and REM behavior disorder. In fact, the words REM behavior disorder are never mentioned in the article, not there. Just the term parasomnia. So he's saying, so it could be there are 12, I believe 12 parasomnias. So Dr. Ohoyan does not break out how many people with REM behavior disorder are in that very large group, and how many sleepwalkers, or how many people with night terrors, which is another group. So there's no way of knowing what the relationship is, but based on the biology, the physiology of REM behavior disorder, I don't see how there could be a relationship.
Now, as to confusional arousals or confusional arousal, how are they diagnosed? What are some factors that lead professionals like yourself to diagnose somebody with having a confusional arousal?
Well, there are certain criteria for all disorders of arousal: sleepwalking, confusional arousals, and night terrors. They all have similar factors. So among the factors is that you've had more than one. Secondly, they often follow a period of sleep deprivation. That's probably the strongest factor for confusional arousal and sleepwalking. There's often a period of little sleep or no sleep the day before or a couple days before they happen. There's often what we call situational stress. The night of big exam, fight with your family, whatever, but there's a level of stress higher than you normally would have. Sorry, I'm blocking on the other ones, but those are the two biggest ones.
Okay. Now, as to the materials that you, I guess, looked at in relation to this case, that being the 2004 through 2009 Mayo clinic records and the Emory study that was done in 2018, what do they tell us about Mr. McIver, the defendant's, I guess, alertness or sleepiness on the night of the shooting, September 25th of 2016?
Well, he has a history. Part of what the Mayo Jacksonville Sleep Center did was have him fill out a pen and paper diagnostic test. It's called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, ESS. And it was designed because other pen and paper measures of sleepiness were not very good because people get used to being sleepy. So instead he selected, I believe there are 8 situations in which people who are sleepy might tend to doze off. Okay, and there's a variety of situations. There are two that involve a car. One involve, the question is, how likely is it that you would doze off riding in a car for an hour, I think an hour as a passenger. And the other car related one was, how likely would it be for you to doze off stopped at, I think, I can't remember if it says a red light or a stop sign, if you're stopped at a stop sign.
Okay. And do you recall how Mr. McIver answered those questions in the studies done from 2004 to 2009?
Well, he either said that there was no chance he would doze off, or only a slight chance that he would doze off.
And when those questions were asked in his 2018 study, did those answers, did they change?
I haven't seen the actual specific breakdown, but the total, so it went from the total score went from, the maximum you get is 24. His score was 12, which is still within the normal range, as I understand it, just below where you start to say it was serious.
Okay. Now, Dr. Pressman, in relation to the interview of the defendant that you watched with members of the Atlanta Police Department, did anything that the defendant say stick out in your mind?
Several things.
Okay. And what were those?
Well, I think the first one was a description he gave to the police as to how he was feeling as they kept on driving. You can give me the exact words, that he was driving, that he was seeing more and more, people on the streets, and I believe at the end he said it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up.
And would you consider that to be a type of stress or anxiety?
Well, I'd go even further than that. I think hair standing up on the back of your neck is something that is typically associated with fear, fearfulness.
And are stress, anxiety, or as you classified it as fear, are they compatible with sleep or sleeping?
No, people who are very fearful will have a very hard time falling asleep. It's absolutely incompatible. When we treat patients with insomnia, it's one of the things that we make great efforts is to keep that hour or so before bedtime completely free of stress and anxiety. Sometimes we make them take TVs out of their bedrooms, or tell them they can't look at their tablets or their computers for an hour before bedtime, or make phone calls to people that might be disturbing. Those, I think, are lesser measures. Those might be stress. I don't think they cause fear necessarily.
Right. Now, is asking or requesting someone to hand you your firearm consistent with somebody who is asleep?
Who is asleep?
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I'll ask you in the reverse. Asking someone to pass you your firearm consistent with someone who is awake?
Yes.
Okay. And as to REM behavior disorder, in your opinion, based on all the facts and evidence, or I guess the reports, that you looked at, the interviews, as well as the medical records and the 2018 study, is the defendant's, actions and behaviors that evening consistent with somebody experiencing or in the state of REM behavior disorder?
I would say no, as well as the timing is not consistent.
Okay. And what do you mean by the timing?
Well, I believe we only have a few minutes. I think we said 7 to 10 minutes maybe, or probably less, for it to occur. So if he had dozed off almost immediately, then 3 or 4 minutes is not, even 10 minutes is not sufficient time to get to REM, much less to deep sleep.
And did you, as part of your review of this case, have an opportunity to drive the route from the Edgewood exit of the highway of 85 and up to Piedmont Park, 14th Street and Piedmont Road?
Yes, we took sort of on the way back from the airport to the hotel, that's how we drove.
And how many miles was it from the exit to Piedmont Park?
2.6.
Now, is what you reviewed and what the defendants self-described consistent with somebody who was experiencing a confusional arousal?
No.
Okay, and why not?
Well, again, the timing is off. Confusional arousals occur during deep sleep or on the transition to deep sleep at the least. They simply don't occur in light sleep. You cannot have a disorder of arousal. You can't have a partial arousal if you're only just a little bit past being awake. You need to be substantially asleep to have a partial arousal.
Now, can someone wake up or wake up quickly from a confusional arousal and be immediately aware of their surroundings and able to give directions?
Right. It's a standard for all disorders of arousal, sleepwalking, confusional arousal. And people do not wake up suddenly. Remember, they're stuck in this never-never land between sleep and wake. Typically, when they come out of the state, they are confused, and they slowly regain their orientation and their alertness, usually over several minutes.
So is it inconsistent with having a confusional arousal to be immediately aware that you're handling a gun, that the gun discharged, and again, that you're able to give directions to a hospital?
No, that should not be able to occur for several minutes after confusional arousal.
Now, did you do a report after you reviewed all of the materials that we spoke about and applied it to the literature and your 40 years of training experience?
Yes, I did.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 530. And just tell me if you recognize it.
Yes.
And what is State's Exhibit 530?
I'm sorry, what is it? This is my report.
Okay, and is it a fair and accurate copy of the report you did for this case?
Yes.
Okay. And at this time, Your Honor, the State would tender what's been marked as State's Exhibit 530 into evidence for purposes of the record.
Ms. Clark-Palmer, any objection to admitting 530 into the record?
No, Your Honor.
Submitted.
Now, in your report, Dr. Pressman, did you come to conclusions for what you believe, based on all your training and experience, as to the defendant's behavior on September 25th of 2016?
Yes.
Okay. And based on everything that you've reviewed, was the defendant's behavior consistent with somebody suffering from a REM behavioral disorder episode or in that state?
No.
And was it consistent with somebody who was experiencing a confusional arousal?
No.
Okay. Now, based on everything that you reviewed, based on your 40 years of experience, your research, your publications, is the defendant's behavior consistent with somebody who was awake when the gun was fired on September 25th of 2016?
Yes.
No further questions. Any regrets?
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Ms. Clark-Palmer?
Yes, thank you, Judge.
I'm sorry, Mr. Buckley, do you want the exhibit back?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Dr. Pressman, good
Good morning.
You told us that you are a licensed psychologist, correct?
That's correct.
And you also mentioned at some point you were telling us about the American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
That's correct.
Okay, and that was the organization that asked you to look at the ICSD? Or
Yes,
drugs?
I believe it's under their auspices. Their name is on the cover.
And the American Academy of Sleep Medicine also, they sanction and credential other people, doctors who are studying sleep medicine, is that right?
Not any longer, no.
Okay, but they used to do that.
Yes, they did. My credential is from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
Okay, and you were credentialed by them when?
1982, I believe.
Okay, and over time, they changed their criteria for credentialing people as being board certified in sleep medicine, is that right?
No, not exactly.
Okay, well, what do you mean?
Well, what happened, I believe in 2007, the American Board of Internal Medicine, a medical board, decided that they were going to offer a separate credential for medical doctors who were going to be, who specialized in sleep medicine.
Okay, but
So at that point, since, and I should say, so at that point, most of the medical doctors, not all of them, some of them still use the same credential I use, but many doctors took that exam, and all the new doctors who are coming through fellowships and training, who are medical doctors, take that exam.
okay, all right, so am I understanding it correctly? There are two different bodies that provide certification?
No, the original board, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, through the American Board of, I don't remember the name, gave the exam for, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years, and they have stopped giving the exam. However, they maintain the board certifications for those who took it. And new doctors take the American Board of Internal Medicine exam.
Okay, and, all right, so new doctors who are taking the American Board of Internal Medicine exam, what kind of subspecialty do you have to have in order to take their board exam in sleep medicine?
Basically just about any. I mean, American Board of Internal Medicine is what you think, neurology, cardiology, all of those, plus even surgical, ENT doctors can take it.
How about psychologists?
Psychologists cannot take that exam, no.
Okay, so as of today, a psychologist cannot take the board exam from the American Academy of Internal Medicine?
American Board of Internal
American Board of
Medicine. No, of
Internal.
course not.
Okay, all right. And you have a PhD, right?
That's correct.
Do you have an MD?
No.
Okay. So tell me, in your role at the, you were asked some questions about, participating in evaluating patients. So tell me what your role as the psychologist is when people come in to be evaluated for a sleep problem.
Well, you're putting some limitations on it. I'm a psychologist who's trained and board certified as a sleep specialist.
No, just tell me what you do. I don't mean to put limitations on
Well,
it.
I would say the first 20 years of my career, the way we were set up, I basically saw all patients who came into the office initially, and I screened them. I did whatever other testing that we did with them. And then I would meet with the medical doctors, and I would tell them what I think was going on and what we needed to do. And then I might sit in on the medical exam or not. And then we would have usually a group discussion as to what the proper diagnosis and whether we need to do sleep studies and what the likely treatments might be.
All right. Is it fair to say that you work with the medical doctors at the sleep
Oh, of
clinic?
course.
Okay. And when you say you might sit in on the medical exam, when you say medical exam, what do you mean?
There are a long variety of strictly medical questions that need to be asked, just to be thorough. If we're talking about sleep apnea, for instance, which is the most common disorder, I mean, I don't have to sit in it, but I was always very interested in what the airway looks like and how crowded it is and how big the tongue is, and anything else that might be relevant.
Okay. And so the medical exam is done by an MD?
That's correct.
All right. Can you do the medical exam?
No, of course not,
Why not?
because I'm not an MD.
Okay. In reviewing materials for this case, you were provided some data from the district attorney's office, right?
You mean case materials?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Did you also go to the Emory Sleep Clinic?
No.
Okay. Were you given the opportunity to go there?
I guess if I had not received the sleep data, then I would have had to go there, yes.
Okay. Did you have communications with somebody at the Emory Sleep Clinic about going over there to review the raw data?
Well, indirectly with Dr. Rye, yes.
Okay.
But I did, eventually he sent me the data on a little thumb drive, and I was able to review it in my own lab.
Okay, so and am I understanding that you're saying because you got the data on the thumb drive, you did not need to go to the Emory Sleep Clinic?
Yes, that's correct.
But if you needed to go to the Emory Sleep Clinic, is it your understanding that was available for you
Yes.
to do? Okay. All right. So let me kind of start with the REM behavior disorder. Do you have a dispute with the diagnosis that Mr. McIver has REM behavior disorder?
No, I do not.
Okay. Fair to say that that's established by the history that's in the Mayo Clinic records?
Well, by the history and also by the sleep study they did in 2004.
Okay.
Yes, I think there's a little doubt that he has
REM behavior
REM
disorder.
behavior disorder, yes.
And has had it for a while?
Sounds like it, yes.
Okay. So you were asked some questions about the relationship between REM behavior disorder and confusional arousals. So let me ask you a few other questions about that. And Mr. Abati asked you some questions about the study done by, tell me how to say his name, Dr., how did you pronounce it? Okay.
Oh, Hayan?
Okayan, okay.
It's French.
Okay, thank you. And you know that Dr. Rye relied on the study by Dr. Okayan in his statement that there was some relationship between Mr. McIver's REM behavior disorder and confusional arousal.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay, but you take issue with that statement?
Well, I guess you can say I take issue with it.
You don't agree with it?
It's not what's written in the article.
Okay. All right, so this article was written by Dr. Okayan, and there were also two other people listed as, and you tell me what's the right way to refer to them. Are they co-authors or?
Yes.
Okay, so there's
Co-authors.
3 people who authored this article, right?
That's correct.
And it was published in the American Academy of Neurology. Am I right about that, or was it?
Well, the journal is just called Neurology.
Okay,
The American Academy of Neurology is the organization that publishes it.
okay, so published in the Journal of Neurology, or just the journal?
Just Neurology is what they say.
Neurology.
That's all.
All right, I got it. And that is a well-respected publication. Do you
Yes,
agree?
it certainly is.
Okay. And for an article to be published, it has to go through a review process, right?
Yes.
Okay. You know that. Have you participated in the review
Yes,
process?
I'm a frequent, what they call peer reviewer.
Okay. Do you peer review articles for neurology or for a different publication?
I have in the past,
Okay.
but not this one.
Okay. Dr. Okayan is a medical doctor, right?
Yes.
Okay. And he studies sleep, doesn't he?
Broadly speaking, yes.
Okay. And one of the other co-authors was Mark Mahowald? Mahowald? Why can't it be Smith or Jones or something?
Well, I'm Pressman, it's okay.
That's right. And Dr. Mahowald has passed away, but he was a...
Oh, no, he hasn't passed away.
Okay, thank you.
I talked to him last week.
Well,
Better not
good to know. Good to know. I apologize to him.
He's retired,
He's
but
retired,
not dead.
thank you. He also studies sleep disorders.
Yes.
Okay. And the third person, Dr. Damian Ledger?
I don't know him.
Okay. Do you know what he studies?
I don't know whether he's affiliated with Dr. Mahowald, is from University of Minnesota,
Okay.
and is probably the most famous expert for parasomnias,
Okay.
although he's retired now. And I don't know who Damian Ledger is.
Okay. And
He's probably there somewhere. They usually do talk about affiliations.
And if you want to look at it to refresh your
No, maybe
recollection,
online you'd have to look at it.
just let me know. So the title of the article is "Are Confusional Arousals Pathological?"
That's right.
Okay. And they did, first of all, the study was approved by Stanford University.
Yes, any kind of study has to go through what's called the Internal Review Board,
Okay.
IRB.
Okay. All right. This study went through the Internal Review Board at Stanford University, and they called over 19,000 people on the phone, right?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yes. And out of interviewing those people, some people said didn't provide information for whatever reason, right?
Well, I don't know, if someone calls you during dinner and wants to talk about your sleep, I imagine they had a lot of hang-ups, but they're very persistent.
But they ended up getting almost 16,000 completed interviews from the people called.
Yes.
All right. And they asked these people various questions about their sleep, right?
Well, they're using a computer program. I think it's mentioned their sleep eval. Because the people asking the questions are Stanford students. They're not sleep specialists. So they basically, it's a very fancy program. They ask a question, and if it's yes, then it goes over there to answer those questions. And then if it's no, it goes back over there. And so basically they just follow through, filling in the fields that the computer program tells them to fill out.
Okay. And then ultimately all the answers that were received were reviewed in some form or fashion by these three co-authors.
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things that the people were being asked questions about was whether or not they had any kind of sleep disorder, right?
Well, they were being asked specific questions about, Dr. Ohayon has a term that he used, nocturnal wandering, okay, which means you're sort of up and about doing things at night, although it doesn't necessarily mean you're asleep. And so he's asking questions about doing bizarre behaviors in your sleep, those sorts of things. I haven't seen the questionnaire that was used.
Okay.
But these questions were specifically about things like confusional arousals.
Okay. And they were trying to find out if any of the people being called, among other things, one of the things they were trying to find out is if they had a parasomnia, right?
If they had a history of parasomnia, they give a definition in there about unusual behaviors out of sleep, pretty much like what I described initially. As you fall asleep, as you wake up, did you do anything unusual?
Right.
It's a very general kind of question.
Okay. And what the article reported is that there was that people who reported having a confusional arousal, maybe the right way to say this, what the article reported was that people who had a parasomnia were more likely to report having experienced a confusional arousal.
That's right.
Okay. And now, to be fair, the article, this study, doesn't break down, well, what kind of parasomnia did those people
That's
have?
right.
Okay. But REM behavior disorder is a parasomnia.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other study out there that contradicts this article that says, well, no, in fact, people who have parasomnias are not more likely to have a confusional arousal?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Do you know of any other studies that focus on the relationship between parasomnias and confusional arousals?
I wouldn't think so. Confusional arousal is a parasomnia. So my concern in this article was that actually some of the people being asked this question may have actually had confusional arousals, and so they're being, it's sort of a strange question.
Okay.
And plus there's no way to break it out. So there are 12 potential parasomnias. Well, how many of them did have REM behavior disorder? We don't know. So you can't say that it increases the risk of confusional arousal because it's simply not there.
Okay. Sounds like this is an area where we need some more study.
Well, these kind of studies, you should say that these are not the kind of studies that are done in the sleep laboratory. These are, I won't bore you with statistical stuff, but these are studies that are done to show increased risk. If you have A, then there's a risk you may have B. And so the next step would be, well, let's take some of these people and put them in the sleep laboratory and test to see, can we prove that that relationship actually occurs? Does someone with REM behavior disorder, for instance, respond the same way as someone who is known to have confusional arousals? But as far as I know, that hasn't been done. A very hard study to do.
Okay. But as to this study, you're not aware of anything else that contradicts the statement that people who have a parasomnia are more likely to have a confusion?
No, I think it's within the non-REM parasomnias, we know that that's true. That many people diagnosed with confusional arousals also have a history of sleepwalking. They probably have night terrors as a kid. They may have various variations on a theme. Some of them may have sexual behavior in sleep. Some people actually drive in their sleep. So, often there's a variety of these disorders that all occur in the same individual, mainly because they all have the same basis, the same origin in the brain. But they're expressed differently for reasons we don't know.
Actually, so that kind of leads into my next question. Are you saying that an individual cannot have, I'm not talking about at the same time, but just one person, can they have REM behavior disorder and experience a confusional arousal?
Yes, there's a disorder called parasomnia overlap disorder.
What is that?
Well, in this case, they both have proven diagnoses of both REM behavior disorder and some type of disorder of arousal.
Did I understand that what you were saying is, well, you can't be experiencing REM behavior disorder and a confusional arousal at the exact same time?
No, that's impossible.
Okay, because one involves REM sleep and one involves non-REM.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm with you. So confusional arousals, I think you told us, are part of disorders of arousal, right?
Yes.
Okay. And disorders of arousal typically occur during deep non-REM sleep.
Yes.
Okay. You use the word typically in your report when talking about disorders of arousals, right?
And I think I'm the one who I actually wrote the draft of that section. I probably wrote typically there as well, so. In the international classification where it says it,
Okay.
That was my responsibility for the first draft.
Okay, all right. So, I'm sorry, I was asking about the report that you
Oh,
wrote.
I'm sorry.
In this case, no,
I apologize.
States Exhibit 530.
Right.
In that portion of your report, you wrote that disorders of arousal typically occur from deep non-REM sleep, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you went on to talk about typically a disorder of arousal, talking about confusional arousals, must have a perfect storm of factors, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me talk about the perfect storm of factors that you would typically expect to be present. First of all, let me ask you about, I guess, kind of the word typically. Is it fair to blend together men and women of all different ages and say, well, this is what, a typical person sleeps like, or do we need to break it down by age and gender?
Not by gender.
Okay.
Certainly by age, there are changes. The amount of deep sleep declines precipitously. I believe the study of your client showed only 8 minutes of deep sleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's not unusual for his age group. Also, REM sleep declines. There are many more, sleep is much more fragmented, not necessarily for any particular reason that we understand other than the brain is just aging. Other disorders tend to appear and increase, such as sleep apnea increases with age. There are involuntary movements of the legs that increase with age. So there's a lot of differences with age.
So as people age, they experience less deep sleep, right?
Well, we see less deep sleep in the
Okay.
laboratory. It's one of these arguments about, we only know what we can record in the laboratory.
Okay.
So there are also changes to the way their brain waves look, which is part of the argument. Typically, in a younger individual, when you're deeply asleep, you have a certain kind of brain wave. It's called a delta wave. And these are these great big waves. And older individuals, the waves do not go up quite as much. They're not as tall. And based on the rules that we have to follow to analyze sleep, when the tallness decreases, it may not qualify as a delta wave. And so people say, well, what does that mean? They still have the lower stuff. I'm sorry, that's way too technical.
It's okay.
I apologize.
Well, no, but you answered my question,
Yeah.
I think, which is in the lab, you all observe that people have less deep sleep as they get older.
That's correct.
But people can still have disorders of arousal as they get older.
Well, it declines very, very sharply with age.
Okay.
Okay? Disorders of arousal are most common in kids. And you can get 40% of kids reporting, or their parents reporting, night terrors, for instance. By the time you're in your 20s, we're down to, depending on which study you look at, somewhere, usually around 1% of people still have occasional episodes. And then that declines even further as you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s. It's pretty unusual for it to appear for the first time when you're older, if you never had it before when you were younger.
Okay. But it doesn't disappear.
Not 100%, no.
Okay. Including confusional arousals, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in your report, you talk about the factors that typically occur prior to a confusional arousal occurring, right? You talk about genetic predisposition, priming factors, and then precipitating, provoking, or trigger factors.
Yes, those are, in 2007 I wrote an article attempting to update the science and hopefully help my colleagues be able to do a better diagnosis of parasomnias. And so we have the 3 Ps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me focus on the second P, the priming factor. One of the priming factors you told us about is sleep deprivation.
Yes.
Okay. Another priming factor may be situational stress, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you saw in the documents that you reviewed in this case, and I think Mr. Abati was asking you about it is the situation where Mr. McIver reported being fearful, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that could be an example of situational stress.
Yes.
Okay. Now, then
But I should say that's very atypical for the way it occurs in general. I mean, you don't have the stress and then boom, seconds or minutes later have the confusion or arousal. That's not the way it happens.
Right. Well, so let's talk about that. Am I understanding your testimony correctly to say that it's atypical that you would have that kind of stress and then fall back asleep?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. You also saw in the data you reviewed in Mr. McIver's 2018 sleep study at Emory,
Yes.
you saw that during the times when he was the multi-latency sleep test. Did I get the title right?
Multiple sleep latency tests. Just say MSLT, we do.
Okay, and in the MSLT, you saw that there was one occasion where in the nap you fell asleep in 2 minutes.
I think it was 5 minutes, but
Yeah,
nevertheless.
I get it wrong, 5 minutes. And is that a pretty fast amount of time to fall asleep?
No, not in his age group, it's not. I mean, what's atypical about that study is the fact that he didn't fall asleep 3 times and almost didn't fall asleep the 4th time. That's very, very, very atypical for a man of his age. That's what a 12-year-old does.
Okay, explain that to me. Why is that atypical for a man of his age to not fall asleep?
Well, remember the situation. Okay? We're not talking about the back of the car or anything. We're talking about you're in a sleep disorder center laboratory room, and I've never seen the Dr. Rye's rooms, but as described, it's we usually say it looks like a nice dorm room. It's dark, it's quiet. You're on a bed with a pillow and blankets. You do have all those electrodes attached to you, which could be annoying to some people. And also, I think that patients often tell us that, you're being monitored. Sleep studies are among the most intensive monitoring you can have in a hospital without being invasive. So anything that could go wrong, the technician will see, so they often feel quite safe being monitored. So under those circumstances, and being asked, so the instructions to the patient is, please try and fall asleep as fast as you can. So the goal is to fall asleep. Okay? The goal is not to stay awake. So under those conditions, we find that the people who stay awake are people who are, I guess, naturally alert, naturally, anxious, maybe, naturally alert, and getting as much sleep as they should. Most Americans, do not sleep as much as they should. They do not wake up fully alert. So generally, the research shows that the people who don't fall asleep are these energetic, 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds. You put them in the same situation, they just lay there in the dark and they don't fall asleep. You take someone my age, and I've actually done an MSLT myself, I don't fall asleep really fast, but I always fall asleep. So not to be able to fall asleep is very unusual. And especially in light of his sleep the night before. If you remember, he fell asleep in 2 minutes the night before, and he slept only 6 hours. And I believe his usual total sleep time was 8 hours, 9 hours. So he was a little sleep deprived at the time, right? So, and then the next day he comes in the lab and then he can't fall asleep. I mean, he should have been sleeping, but he wasn't. So.
Okay, so on 4 of the naps, 3 of the naps he didn't fall asleep at all, correct?
Yes.
Okay. 1 nap, he fell asleep within 5 minutes.
No,
right?
15.
But there was 1 nap.
Okay, one nap was the 3rd nap.
Right.
About 1:30 in the afternoon.
Fell asleep within 5 minutes.
Yes.
2 REM sleep.
Yes.
Okay. And then, as you said, the night before, he fell asleep within 2 minutes.
That's right.
Okay. And that's a short amount of time.
Right, it's within the normal range. If someone keeps a regular sleep schedule, then 2 minutes is not unusual. And we don't really know. I mean, it's typical, it's not required, that patients fill out what is called a sleep log for about a week before they do the testing. They just write down, I went to sleep here and I woke up there. So we know how many hours of sleep that they had during the week. So we don't know if he slept poorly the night before he came to the lab, or 2 nights before the lab, or he just, even if you burn the candle at both ends, which Americans like to do, they go to sleep late, they wake up early, I think they can make do on less sleep. Even that would change the multiple sleep latency test. The MSLT is very sensitive to changes in sleep and all sorts of other things. Dr. Rai actually noted 6 hours is about the least amount of sleep that you would accept and actually continue on to do the multiple sleep latency test. If he had had 5 hours, he would have canceled. That's because that alone would make him sleepy. But then he wasn't sleepy. I mean, the way this is to be interpreted is not that you look at one of the naps, you look at all of them together.
Okay. All right, in the sleep lab, as you just said, we don't know about Mr. McIver's sleep history before he went to the sleep lab in January.
That's correct.
Didn't see anything where he kept a log.
No, it was, at least I didn't see it. No.
Okay. And from September 2016, you didn't see anything in the documents that you reviewed about a report of Mr. McIver's sleep the night before the shooting?
No, I don't think so.
You did see in the documents that you reviewed that there were reports that he played golf that day?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see anything in the reports where he reported having taken a nap at all that day?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. Did you see anything in the reports about the temperature outside, that it was a warm, sunny day in late September?
I believe he said something about that during his police interview.
Okay. And the shooting occurred somewhere around 10 p.m., roughly, correct?
That's right.
Okay. A time when it would be typical to expect maybe somebody would be going to sleep for the evening.
Well, I think it's a little earlier than his usual sleep time, assuming it was the same as that he kept in the years when he was being followed at Mayo Jacksonville. I was impressed that he kept seemed to keep a regular time, which is unusual. At least that's what he put in his questionnaire. So, I'm sorry, I forgot what your question
His
was.
questionnaire and the last record you saw was from 2009.
2009 is correct.
Right, now we're in 2016, right?
Correct.
Okay. So let me ask you about the precipitating or provoking factors. You say that there's got to be some kind of trigger event that would trigger the arousal, correct?
Well, that's what's generally accepted in the field, yes.
Okay.
Something has to start it going.
Okay. Something like a noise or a touch, something like that?
Yes.
Okay. Something like being shouted at, hey, wake up! That might be something that could trigger someone to have an arousal.
It could.
Okay. And the precipitating and provoking factors may be affected by alcohol. Is that a fair statement?
No, I'm sorry. Would you say that again, please?
The triggering factor or somebody's arousal from sleep, may that be affected or facilitated by alcohol?
No, absolutely not. We consider that junk science.
Okay. And in this case, in the documents that you reviewed Mr. McIver's statement to the police, correct?
Yes.
Did you also review Ms. Carter's statement to the police?
Probably. I don't remember, quite frankly.
Okay. Do you remember reviewing that she reported that Mr. McIver, that she assumed he was asleep after he was given the gun?
I don't remember that. I remember there was something about him not participating in a political conversation as sort of something he would ordinarily do as evidence that he was not, fully conscious.
Okay. Did you see anything in the documents that you reviewed where someone said, no, after he got the gun, between that time and the shooting, he was awake the entire time, and I know that because he was talking to me, or something like that?
No.
Okay. Do I understand that you are saying it seems, in your opinion, inconsistent for him to ask for the gun and then fall back asleep?
And to say that he was so fearful that the hair on his neck was standing up. If he needed the gun, it seems to me his safety depended on staying awake and alert.
Okay. Is it impossible that he fell back asleep, in your opinion?
Based on my current knowledge of sleep medicine, I would say it is not possible that he fell back asleep.
So you're saying, that your opinion, you're 100% positive he was awake that entire time?
I'm just saying based on the current scientific, sleep science, I believe he did not fall back asleep.
It's impossible that he fell back asleep. That's what you're saying?
Just
Objection, Your Honor. I think this has been asked and answered twice now.
Next question.
You also wrote in your report that confusional arousals typically occur in conjunction with deep sleep, right?
yes.
You didn't write that they always occur in conjunction with deep sleep.
No. Well, we couldn't possibly know that in terms of the published research. They're in deep sleep.
Okay? But you can't know that they always occur in connection with deep sleep.
No, but I can know they don't occur in light sleep.
Okay? That's why you use the word typically, right? Because you can't
Yes.
say with 100% certainty.
Right. I mean, there's no way to be 100% sure about that. Yes.
You also, I think you wrote in your report, noted that the 2018 sleep study at Emory didn't show any signs of a confusional arousal.
That's correct. And there was no notation by Dr. Ryan.
Okay. But it's fair to say that sleep studies don't always capture, let me rephrase my question, just because a sleep study or polysomnography, let me maybe use those
Just
words.
say PSG.
PSG and MSLT.
Very good.
Okay, just because those two things don't capture evidence of a parasomnia doesn't mean that the person doesn't have that parasomnia.
No, you're quite right.
Okay, because for a lot of reasons, right? One reason may be, well, one night is not enough to capture all of this person's sleep habits.
Well, as I said, there are the three Ps. So the may not be sleep deprivation there, may not be stress, may not be something, a trigger that is sufficient to trigger it. So it may be a low noise might not do it. Maybe a louder noise may do it. Airplane passing overhead might do it, but it's very specific also to the individual.
Okay. And so evidence in this case, well, just for example, that in the PSG and the MSLT that we didn't see Mr. McIver, punching or kicking his arms, doesn't mean that he doesn't have brain behavior disorder.
Oh, no, and I didn't think that.
Right. Same thing for confusional arousals. Just because you don't see somebody have a confusional arousal in the lab doesn't mean that they haven't had them at other points in their life.
Well, the lab is only confirmatory. It's much more based on history, on what we call clinical symptoms. And if we can confirm it in the laboratory, that's great. But if we don't, we'd still go with the diagnosis based on the clinical history.
Okay. All right. So let me just ask you a couple more questions and get some clarity on the Mr. McIver and the nights of September 2016. You saw in the documents you reviewed where he reported being in an area where the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, right?
That's what he said.
Then he also said that they got out of that area and he was satisfied that they were no longer in danger.
Well, the order of those is he first said something about being out of the area, and then he said this thing about how as he drove along it got worse and worse and worse, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. So when I looked at that, it seemed that the second statement sort of contradicted the first.
Did you bring a copy of Mr. McIver's statement with you this morning?
No, I don't. It's on my computer.
Okay. Let me show you let me ask you this question. Okay, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. Your recollection of reviewing this statement is that he asked for the gun, right?
Yes.
Okay, because they were in a bad area.
Yeah. So he says, yes.
Okay. All right, so then my question was, then he reported being satisfied they were out of the area.
I believe that's the, yes.
Okay. And did I get that chronology wrong?
Well, as to the best of my memory,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. All right. So he asks for the gun, and then he reports being out of the area that concerned him. Right?
Yeah, although there's no indication of the actual timing of that.
Okay. Fair enough. Right. He doesn't give a, well, then 30 seconds passed, and then we were out of the area. Right? It's a little bit vague recounting of the events.
Yes.
Right? Okay. But he reports being out of the area that he was concerned about and then falling back asleep. That's what he reported.
Yes.
Okay. He reported that the stressful situation that caused him to get the gun out was over. Right?
He didn't say that.
He didn't say those words, but that's what he said. He was satisfied they were out of the area
Well,
that
they
concerned
were
him.
out of the area, but he doesn't say anything about his state of mind, about whether he still was feeling fearful. Wasn't saying why he still thought he needed to have the gun on his lap. So I acknowledge that he did say that, but there's a lot missing from the description.
Okay. You maybe would have asked some more questions.
Well, I'm not the detective, so I don't know what I would have asked him under the conditions.
Just a moment here. I think I just have a couple questions, but I'm done. Is it fair to say that there are people who may have some sort of sleep disorder or parasomnia who never make it into the sleep lab?
Oh, sure.
Okay. And is that because people may have some kind of sleep disorder or parasomnia, but it's not impacting their life in such a way that causes them to get to the sleep lab?
Well, either that or they're just deniers. We've got a lot of people who don't like doctors, they don't like hospitals, and they don't like their family telling them, you gotta go see the doctor.
Right. Is there a percentage or a number of how many people have confusional arousals?
Well, they're just the estimates that, like you have there, based on these kind of telephone surveys, which of course have their own kind of problem in terms of estimating. But it's probably more than people think. I think when we say 1 to 4%, that includes confusional arousals. So they're tens of thousands higher.
So when you say 1 to 4%, just so the jury understands, what's the 1 to 4%?
1 to 4% of the population of the United States. There's a lot of people.
Okay. And if somebody has, if somebody's been, is it correct to say somebody's been diagnosed as having confusional arousal?
Sure.
Okay. All right, if somebody gets diagnosed as having a confusional arousal, how often do they have a confusional arousal?
Not always. There's a difference between confusional arousal and arousal.
Okay.
I mean, everybody wakes up briefly from sleep every night, probably 30 or 40 times, but then they just go right back to sleep and don't remember what happened. That's what the data shows. So, I'm sorry, what the question again, please?
How often does somebody, if somebody has confusional arousals, how often do they have them?
Well, again, this is with, are we talking in a year, in a night?
You could, well, in a year.
Well, the older you get, the fewer you'll have. So, someone who's 12 years old and has confusional arousal sleepwalking, they could have it several times a week, even every night a week. Okay, but as you get older, it's fewer and fewer. So when you get into 20s and 30s and 40s, unless you have a very severe case, it may be only 2 or 3 times a year, and it's only when you accidentally, have this combination of factors, as we understand it. So you're stressed out, and for some reason you didn't get a good night of sleep, and how often does that happen? And then one of the things we don't know is we don't know what it is, so you get those 3 factors together. Well, what happens in the brain to make it happen then? Because certainly there are other times when all the factors occur and you don't have it. So we're still missing some scientific information.
And is it possible that somebody has a confusional arousal one time in a year and then maybe doesn't experience it again?
It's possible, yes.
Okay. In part because of what you just told us, sort of typically we expect this kind of convergence of the factors.
Yeah, but you would also expect, a history as a child perhaps, or a family history or something to show that it sort of runs in the family.
Okay.
But
Okay. When did you first get involved in reviewing documents in this case?
Well, I think I was Mr. Abati's second choice, maybe third choice,
Okay.
because the other people couldn't do it.
Okay.
So, in January sometime?
Okay. And I assume that you didn't come down here on your own free time, but you're being compensated for your work here?
Of course.
Okay. And how much are you being compensated?
$350 per hour.
What's your total hours in the case?
I haven't added it up yet.
Well, it's more than just your time today.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be, I don't know, 20, 30 hours, I'm sure.
Times $300 an hour, whatever that math
Right,
is.
so, maybe $6,000, $7,000, maybe more.
Okay. All right, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Abate, any redirect?
60 seconds, yes.
Go.
Is the twilight zone, is that deep sleep?
No, actually, it's very light sleep.
And was the first time the defendant was considered to have experienced or diagnosed the confusional arousal 16 months after he shot and killed his wife?
Well, the records prior to, the records from Mayo Clinic, Jacksonville, don't mention confusional arousal or any other disorder of arousal. And so I guess the first mention is after the fact, yes.
No further questions, sir.
Jurors, if you have questions for Dr. Pressman, ask them down to the left. Thank you, sir. Perfect timing. Doctor,
Yes.
would you consider RBD and confusional arousal to be possible co-occurring diagnosis?
Co-occurring. Well, there is a small group of patients who could have them separately in the same night, what I called a parasomnia overlap disorder. They cannot occur simultaneously, certainly. And when they do occur, parasomnia overlap disorder, the REM behavior disorder typically occurs towards the end of the night, and the confusional arousal or even sleepwalking occurs in usually the first 90 minutes or so. Okay, but they're both very clearly, separately diagnosable, and you see them clearly and separately on the sleep study as well.
So you're saying someone could suffer from both, but you couldn't have an occurrence of both at the same time?
That's correct.
From the article that you discussed with the French doctor and the guy who's still alive, how were the 20,000 some odd subjects of the studies selected, if you know? Just random phone book?
Just random. You're the lucky one. You get to get the phone call. And these, I believe, mostly were done in the United States. Some of them may have been done in Europe as well. Right, so it's just random. Just call them up, ask them if they're willing to talk about, answer some questions about their sleep, and other matters. I should say they did take a history about psychological questions, food. You know, I mean, they weren't specifically looking for parasomnias. That was one of about 20 things they were interested in. I think actually the highest relationship to confusional arousal was stomach problems. That's on that study. The people who had GI problems reported confusional arousals the most.
So the universe was not a group who had already reported to the medical profession that they suffered from a sleep disorder?
That's correct.
How much weight, when one is diagnosing a sleep disorder, is put into patient questionnaires among the variables?
Well, sleep disorders is one thing, but parasomnias is something different because, just as was asked, patients aren't so always nice enough to have their disorder in the laboratory where you can see it. We rely much more generally on the questionnaires. Actually, it's fairly common for even people with very severe parasomnias not to perform. Actually, that's what we say. They don't perform in the laboratory. They could be sleepwalking every night at home, but in the laboratory they just lay there and sleep like everybody else.
What are the benefits of using sensors on the head? You mentioned the brain, the muscles around the chin, the eyes, as opposed to putting sensors on the limbs or the extremities?
Oh, well, we do it on all of them, actually. In order to know what state of sleep you're in, are you in REM sleep, or deep sleep, or light sleep, you need to get your brain waves, which is what's here. In order to know when you're in REM sleep, you need to know whether the eyes are moving. And also, in order to know when you're in REM sleep, you need to know whether the muscle tone is present or absent. Because in REM sleep, the muscle tone, shuts off. Okay, but other questions such as movements, breathing, there are lots of measures for breathing that are standard. So is the air moving through your nostrils and your mouth? Is your chest and abdomen moving in and out? EKG, cardiac, heart function. How fast is your heart beating? Do you have any arrhythmias? Electrodes on the legs to see if you're kicking or moving them. And in cases of parasomnias, also electrodes on the arms to see if they're moving around. Okay?
Explain to the jurors, please, why you concluded, based on what you know, that it was impossible for Mr. McIver to have fallen back asleep after he asked for the firearm.
Okay, well, we're talking
While
about...
still in the car.
While still in the car. Right, well, it's just what we know about the relationship of stress, anxiety, and fear. I mean, he asked for the gun because he felt danger. Okay? I assume that, a gun is a defensive weapon against attack. He thought all these people, I guess, on the street might, attack the car or whatever. And he became so fearful that he actually had biological signs of it, as he describes it, that the hairs on the back of his neck. That's very fearful. And in that kind of condition, people don't sleep. You can't be extremely fearful and be relaxed enough to fall asleep within moments.
Is it possible for someone to wake up from sleep, fall quickly back asleep, this is setting aside stressors, and immediately go into dream state?
That would depend on, I think, how much sleep they'd already had, okay, and how long they'd been awake. If they were awake for long enough, and I can't tell you if Mr. McIver was awake for long enough, that often is like a resetting of the clock. You start fresh, with light sleep, intermediate sleep, deep sleep, and have to go through the whole thing again. If you've been asleep for a significant period of time, it's possible that on falling back asleep you might continue in the cycle. It would depend on where the cycle was. I think at most it was 20 or 30 minutes of sleep beforehand, and if the sleep study is any measure of when he would go into REM, that was 64 minutes. So if he fell back asleep, it's not likely he would go directly into REM sleep at that time.
Mr. Abate, any follow-up based on those inquiries?
No, just
Ms. Clark-Palmer?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Pressman, that last question you were answering, in the MSLT, we did see on that one nap where Mr. McIver goes into REM sleep in 5 minutes.
That's right, but that was not with alcohol present.
Right. And then you were asked about, why your opinion is that he would not have fallen back asleep after getting the gun, and you went through that. But you also acknowledged that he reported being satisfied they were out of the area of danger, right?
Well, he said a few words to that effect, although I don't know exactly when he felt that.
Okay. You weren't there in the car that night?
No, nobody was, right?
Well, the driver was in the car.
The driver was, but I certainly wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know that she reported that after going to the area and giving him the gun, that he was quiet, and I'm sure he went to sleep with the gun in his hand. That's what she said.
Well, with all due respect to her, I don't see how she could.
But that's what she reported.
Well, fine, she reported it.
It's okay.
That's what she reported?
Well, I think we went through this. I mean,
That's the yes and answer
Okay.
part.
His answer got talked over, so I'm just
Right.
making sure that part
I'm
was
sorry.
clear.
No, you didn't talk over that, okay.
That was my last question.
All right, may Dr. Pressman step down?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Apologies to your law students. But hey, this is a better excuse. You were actually in court testifying, you should be able to relate to that.
Let's see how many are actually watched.
Extra credit if they want.
I'll tell them that you said that.
Okay. Thanks for your time. Mr. Rucker, tell me what is next for the state?
Your Honor, given what we discussed with respect to Mr. Harvey's concern and the vehicle, I would ask that we perhaps undertake that experience now.
Okay, I need to get some things on the record, but Mr. Harvey's provisionally, we'll get more on the record in a minute. Any issue with turning to that? Are there things we need to work out such that we shouldn't do it now?
No, I don't think there are issues regarding the timing at all. It's cold down there.
Okay,
Let me just make a recommendation to all parties involved.
okay. Well, let's do this. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna go on a field trip, but I need to work out some of the logistics. You are gonna go probably in two groups, 8 and 7, 7 and 8. We'll work that out. It's gonna be in numerical order just to keep it tied to something we've been following. And I'm going to tell you more about the field trip. You're not leaving the building, but you are going to a place where it'll be a little colder. So I'm going to have you all go into the jury room so I can iron out the last details with both sides. And I'll bring all of you out here to let you know exactly how this is going to work. You're also going to have a lunch break, but your lunch break may be a little shorter because half of you will just be sitting in the jury room for a little while the other half is on a field trip, and then we'll flip the two groups, okay? So, no outside research, don't talk about the case other than your building excitement that we're going on a field trip, and I'll tell you more about it when you come back after.
All rise for the jury. You may be seated.
I'm going to need to get a little input from Deputy Kane in a minute. I had hoped that we would have 2 deputies today, and we've been blessed with only one. But tell me, Mr. Harvey, if you had a sufficient opportunity to look at the setup of the SUV, the dowel in it, the positioning of the chair, such that you are comfortable that having a jury view now, the exact contours of which I'll describe in a second, but that having a jury view now is acceptable to the defense.
Well, Judge, we did, Mr. Hyde and I had an opportunity to go look at the vehicle downstairs outside of it being cold. We had a sufficient opportunity to be able to look at the vehicle, measure the vehicle, observe the trajectory rod. We being the defense and crime scene tech Trotter, worked our way through positions and measurements. We had one disagreement and it relates.
You and Ms. Griffin, because I believe Ms. Griffin was there, or you and Mr. Trotter?
Me and Mr. Trotter.
Okay.
We repositioned the front seat by putting the back of the front seat at the bottom, the back reclined just the technical.
Smidge?
I was going to say smidgen. The
That's bigger.
technical term being smidgen.
Okay, so a little more than a smidge.
We had a disagreement as to, I said it needs to go back another smidgen, I don't know how to spell that. And crime scene tech, Troggett said, no, I think it's in the proper position. He and we were using his photographs because he is the closest person to the scene as it occurred.
And did he have the rulers like we saw in some of the pictures, or it really is as subjective as you're looking at it saying it needs to be angled back a little bit more, and he's looking at it saying, nah, as I line up photo and chair, I think it's in the right spot.
I had a ruler, and I measured various measurements, but I don't know whether I can measure the smidgen. And may I?
You can show us.
Yeah, sure.
That's why it's basically 109.
Stacy? In State's Exhibit 109, and I'm going to show you that one, which is 2855.
$28.55 is the page for Mr. Gardner's work.
No, it's from Mr. Troggett's identification of his crime scene photographs. And let me put them up on the screen so that we can discuss it. This is State's 109. If you could see the seat gap in where the seat belt buckle is, there is a slight gap between the back of the seat and the, I guess, the console.
There's a lighter fabric that makes a very distinct line, and that's a great point of reference.
Yes. So when we first observed the vehicle, I said, hey, the back of the seat is too far forward because we couldn't see that gap. We collectively, and you please correct me if I'm misstating anything here, we collectively moved the back of the seat back until where Mr. Troggett said, okay, I can see that gap now, this is where it is, relative to the seatbelt buckle there, and the gap that you just identified in State's Exhibit 109.
So the base of the front passenger seat was not an issue. People agreed that the base was in the right place, because the other way you could achieve what you're calling the gap would be to leave the back of the seat alone and move the base of the seat back.
I think that we had no disagreement about the base.
Okay, so it's all about angle of recline.
All about angle of recline. And Mr. Troggett's his crime scene photo that we used also is this, identified as 2855. I don't know whether that's been admitted.
I didn't know.
Well, I'm going to mark it and put it in for purposes of this discussion. You can clearly see from a different perspective that gap between the console and the seat. When we moved it, I said it's got to go back another smidgen. He said, nah, that's where it ought to be. Our only disagreement is the smidgenness of how far back. And I could not measure that because we don't have a measurement from the time. It is purely visual. It's purely, I think that looks right. He thinks it's back. I think it needs to go back a smidgen. That's our only disagreement. Now, I don't know. I do not know whether that changes anything, whether that makes any material difference. It is just our effort to make sure that the jurors get an accurate visual of where, as best as we could, where the seat is.
If, when we all go down there, before the jurors get there, if I were to look, don't take the picture away from
Oh,
me.
I'm sorry.
Would we see at least some gap between, I can't tell if that's supposed to be silver or metallic or a light color, but there's a trace of a gap between the silver edge of the center console and where the forwardmost part of the back of the front passenger seat is there at least a gap there? Are you saying the gap isn't quite right, or when you look at it, maybe there's not even a gap?
When I look at it, I didn't see the gap. CSI Troggett and I, you know, I see the gap. I don't see the gap. I see the gap. No, I don't see the gap.
Good, Ms. Griffin was there, you said.
Yeah, and it was very collegiate and professional. So I have got no concerns there. I don't think I saw that kind of gap.
Okay. So you made a record of it. Do you want, when we get down there, for me to look at it and come back to say the gap was sufficient, or to say, we have to hook the jump cables back up if we're going to move it back a little bit? So I'm looking for your thoughts as to how you want to proceed. Preserve your concern that, first of all, we're talking about something very small, but from your visual inspection, it wasn't quite the way it looked from the photos. And you, like myself, are unable to say in the way that a Mr. Gardner might have been able to, or, well, that's actually the difference between 0.5 and 2.5. It's within the standard deviation or the tolerance range, and so I'll use his number and still come up with my conclusion.
And that was my problem. I tried to take a photograph and send it to either Mr. Gardner or Mr. Robinson, and haven't really gotten any response. Mr. Robinson is testifying, Mr. Gardner is in North Carolina, which is, you know, okay. That's my only concern. Other than that, we really agreed on everything else, correct?
Yes, you are.
I don't know how to handle that.
I will look at it when we get down there.
Can I introduce, at least for the record, for purposes of the jury view argument, 2855?
Yes, and why don't you call it, you've reached the end of your exhibit list, 34. I guess you can't, you have two more on the next page in case you ever need more. So this will be defense 34.
And can I make sure that at some point we get that in the record with an appropriate sticker? I got to cut it off so that it'll be a junior size exhibit.
Okay. Defense 34.
They won't let us use this at all.
You said it's 2855 is the reference number?
Image 2855.
Okay.
Taken by crime scene investigator Troggett. Traugott, I think. Right. Okay. I'm going to give stick back to
Okay.
just remind me to mark it and put it in the record. And, or if you'd like to take it when you...
I will, and that will be the reminder.
Take
So
192. That'd be great.
I'll take 2855/defense 34.
And it is cold.
Okay, I'll let the jurors know that. So here's my thought, that we all get situated down there so that both sides can say we're comfortable with this setup. That would include getting Ms. Weaver down there with whatever mobile piece of equipment she's going to have with her. I don't envision her having to take anything down, but she's there out of abundance of caution should someone suddenly start talking. I will have all 15 jurors come back in here in a moment and explain to them that we'll take the first 8, and I'm going numerically, so that would be juror 5, I think through 57. I think that's right, so 5 through 57, I'll call out their numbers. They'd be brought down first after we give the green light to Deputy King. And everyone is in the position that makes them as comfortable as can be. If not necessarily warm, at least able to watch what's going on. I'll instruct the jurors here, all 15 of them, that they'll be coming down in these 2 groups, and then one at a time, and I'll just do it by their number. The juror can approach the vehicle, look in, get in, they can sit in any of the seats except for the front passenger seat, because there's a dowel sticking out of the front passenger seat. They cannot operate the vehicle, but they can otherwise inspect it and sit in it and close doors if they want to close doors. There's not going to be a time limit on any juror doing any of that. And as one juror finishes, we'll have that juror stand away from the group that hasn't done it yet. I'll tell the jurors they're not to talk while they're down there. And then when all 8 are done, we can get Deputy Kane or a colleague to shuttle those 8 up. We'll bring the other 7 down and repeat the process. The media is permitted to be down there. We'll need to find a spot for them as well, but not with any devices that take pictures. If the media wants to get any footage of what it looks like down there, that's for the media to sort out with the sheriff after the jurors are gone and we are back up here. Figure we'll take a lunch break after the jury view so folks can recharge, and then we'll see what the state has next. Mr. Rucker, anything else you want to talk about in terms of logistics for the jury view?
No, sir.
Sure, you've been down there, so state any thoughts?
The front 2 seats require the car to be on in order to move. The back seat, however, does recline, and I think we should advise the jury not to recline that back seat because it is in a position as it was on the, and you can do it without the car being on.
Okay. I think what I'll do is I'm going to tell them, don't move anything. You can move yourself around and you can close the doors, but otherwise don't move things. And the car's not going to turn on. We've received some questions and some witnesses have been in a position to answer about the navigation system. If they can identify that simply by looking at the dashboard, they'll identify it, but we won't be firing the car up. But that's a good point, that they ought not to move anything around, don't touch the dial, etc. Okay. Mr. Hartley, anything else?
Judge, I know that you're going to give them some instruction. Could you give us a preview of the instruction that you're going to give them so that we can
Critique it?
see if it's, yes, see how good it is.
I just made a note here that we don't currently have a charge for the jury charge about a jury view. Don't know if we're going to want one or not. That's up for discussion at the appropriate time. In some ways, this is evidence, and I don't know that we need to single it out from other evidence. So tell me what you, apart from me putting some restrictions, don't talk about it while you're down there, don't move things around. What were you expecting me to say?
You know, it's a cautionary 105 instruction in the vein of this is a piece of evidence like it, because you're allowing it in as this is an evidentiary view, although you're it should be taken into consideration with all the other evidence, and in particular any testimony with regard to
Sure, don't consider it in a vacuum. It's not any more remarkable because you haven't to go on a field trip to see it.
yes.
I will cover that. How cold is it?
It's pretty chilly. It's pretty chilly. I am going to wear my overcoat.
Okay. You're allowed to wear your overcoat.
Well, I know, but I'm telling you.
That's how cold it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunate. Yes, sir. Okay. Deputy Kane, I have one more question. I'm sorry to interrupt the conversation. Folks are going to have to sort of go hither and yon to gather some things. Porter has to go get something warm. I have to get something warm. Will there be someone down there who can radio you that we're in position for you to bring the first group of jurors?
Yes, my captain should be down there.
Okay, and radios work from down there. Great. Then let's bring the jurors in so I can chat with them for a second.
Wait.
Before they come in?
Yes, please.
Okay, can you hold 1 second?
We didn't discuss illumination. All of us, when we were down, when I was there, and I hope I speak for you, we used our cell phones to see. I don't know whether it's going to be in the same place in the basement. It's hard to see in there now. I kind of like it because it was at night when this happened, as close to the actuality of the scene as possible. I don't know what your position. The state talked about videotaping it and giving them the flashlights, but I say nay to that.
Well, we covered the videotaping, and that's not happening.
Okay.
And that was videotaping just to make a record, but we're not doing that because we don't want the jurors feeling like they're on camera. Plus, you pointed out, who knows what that would do with glare, etc. So no recording, but I knew maybe it was under the mistaken impression that the state had said, don't worry, we'll deal with the lighting. And it may be what they elected to do was allow the lighting that occurs not so naturally down there to be the lighting.
Well, I don't know whether that's necessarily within their purview, it being, I think, a matter to be determined. But let's say that we go, we do it without any artificial light. The jurors get in, they get out, whatever they do. What if they say, hey, judge, as this jury is wont to do, if you allow them to do, can we get a flashlight? Can we use our cell phone? Can we use some artificial, can we get some light here? What are we going to do then?
We'll address it in advance. I appreciate why you might have been using a light to determine if the seat was in the correct position. But if your purpose in getting in the car was to experience being in the back seat, and can you not see the dowel? Is it that dark?
No. You can
Okay.
see, well, I can tell you I don't know. Depending upon where it's positioned, you can see you're going to bump into it if you don't see it. But when the door is closed, it's going to be pretty dark in that car, in that vehicle.
Okay. Mr. Rucker, I thought you had indicated that you all were going to explore a lighting situation. What's the state's perspective on this?
Well, yeah, that was, I think, part of the original plan, but I understood that there was perhaps some nay on the part of the defense about bringing in artificial light. My initial suggestion was to just perhaps have 1 or 2 flashlights, and for jurors who said, listen, I'd like to see a little bit better, they could just have access to a flashlight, they could look around and see a little bit better. But I understood that there was a real objection, I think, to that process. Secondarily, we could have perhaps brought in some artificial light. That was explored with our office as well. But again, I understood that the objection was to artificial light. So
this is not a case that hinges on how well could Mr. McIver see what was going on right there in the cab of the car. I appreciate what he perceived outside the vehicle has been the subject of much discussion, but I haven't heard anything about, well, if I had only known there was a wine bottle right there, or I thought that my wife's seat was over here, but it was so dark I couldn't tell. So the lighting inside the cab isn't a factor. I'd be real surprised if anyone argued that. So introducing light so that jurors can literally see the angles doesn't seem problematic to me.
Okay.
But it needs to be uniform, meaning it can't be that one juror uses infrared light and another uses whatever. So I think, I don't have a problem, and I'll let Mr. Harvey state the defense's perspective in a moment. If the jurors, if everyone all had the same thing, if they all had flashlight, but it would be the same one. If you hand it to them, and if they wanted to use it, they would use it. But if it would need to be that, or you guys set up something outside it, and it doesn't sound like that's going to happen.
Right, I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay.
It's practical.
Okay, well, that's not always what governs what Mr.
I understand.
Let's see if they're first. We do it just the way it is, whatever the unnatural lighting conditions may be. And then if there is a request, my position is that we say no, and you understand why. And I think I've put that on the record, but then that decision is yours.
Okay. I will bring this flashlight down, and I think we will preview the scene before Deputy Kane gets the signal to bring down the first group. I received a little input from the Sheriff's Office that they would prefer to get all the jurors down there rather than break them into two. I have asked pretty please if they could just wait a little bit before they bring that second group, because poor juror 108 is our highest number of jurors. We'll be down there for a long time before juror 108 gets in that vehicle. And I'm taking you guys at your word, it's not warm down there. I don't know why we want to icebox the jurors. But it is also, the Sheriff's Office is going above and beyond, and there are a bunch of folks plugged into making this work. And so I will defer to their space, and I'll defer to them. What I think we should do is bring all the jurors in now, lay a little bit of groundwork for them, and then we'll all go down there, get situated. Once everyone is comfortable with the setup, then we'll get word to Deputy Kane, and he'll bring the first 8 down, and then walk back real slowly to get the remaining 7. Anything else, Mr. Rucker or Ms. Griffin, before the jurors come in?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No, sir.
Okay, let's bring all 15 in, please.
All rise for the jury. Jury's all present and counted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Kane. You all can be seated, please. Ladies and gentlemen, in a few moments, 8 of you, to be followed soon thereafter by the remaining 7, are going to get on an elevator and go down into a parking area that's underneath this building, where the vehicle that has been discussed so much during this case is sitting. This is an opportunity for what we call a jury view. You will be able to see some of the evidence that is part of this case. There's nothing remarkable about the evidence that should cause you to treat it differently than any other evidence that you have seen or heard, other than you have to walk out there and it's going to be cold. So as you are evaluating the evidence that you're going to go see in a few minutes, you need to look at it and think about it in the context of everything else that you've received during the course of the trial. This will be a little bit different in the sense that it will be slightly more experiential. One at a time, or we're just going to go numerically, you will be permitted to approach the vehicle. If you want to get in it, you can get in it. You can't move anything in there. You cannot adjust the seats. That would be a problem. That would be like outside research. Don't adjust the seats. The vehicle won't turn on. You won't be able to turn the vehicle on. There will be a dowel in the front passenger seat, akin to the dowel that you've seen in lots of the photos. Don't touch the dowel. The one seat you may not sit in is the front passenger seat, because there's a dowel sticking out the front of it. But you can sit in the rear passenger seat, the driver's seat. If you want to sit in the rear driver's seat, you could sit there. You can close the doors. You can open the doors. Just don't move the chairs. Don't move the dowel. So we'll have you go one at a time. Juror 5 will be going first. When Juror 5 is done, Juror 5 will step away from the car, and we'll have the next juror go numerically. You'll each have an opportunity to do this. None of you has to do this. You're welcome to do it. You'll be given that opportunity. If you choose not to, you choose not to. It's very important that while you're down there, you not talk about what you are experiencing. Don't elbow the one and say, hey, I thought the car was this color and it's that color, or it's shorter or it's taller, or anything like that. You're processing it as you look at it and do what you do, but you're not talking about it with each other, because that's part of deliberations, and that starts hopefully tomorrow sometime, but not today. As I mentioned, we're having you come in 2 groups, the first 8 to be followed kind of soon thereafter by the remaining 7. If at any point it gets too cold down there for you, and you have already seen whatever you're going to see with the vehicle, if you'd let one of the deputies down there know, we'll get you back up into the jury room. But just for their logistics, it's easier to move you in 2 big groups. You can't all fit on the elevator, or we move you all in one big group. But the reality is the juror with the lowest number is going to have an opportunity to see the vehicle long before the juror with the highest number. So that high number juror could get cold, and let us know if it's getting too chilly down there. I may have one other instruction for you once we get down there, but other than that, it should be real quiet. I mean, the attorneys may be speaking quietly amongst themselves. Everyone you're used to will be down there. Everyone is entitled to be down there. Prosecutors, Mr. McIver and his team, Mr. Hyde, they may all be down there out of your way. The media has been invited down there, but no cameras. So none of this will be filmed. But you may see media folks down there who are writing things down, and there won't be any cameras down there. Any logistical questions about what I just described? Sir?
So you say not to sit in the front passenger seat, but about the drivers.
So the only seat you should not sit in is the front passenger seat, because as you've seen in photos, there's a dowel sticking out of the front of the back of that seat. And so if you sat on it, you would potentially move the dowel. Bad choice. But the driver's seat and either of the rear, there's the whole rear bench. The space back there is fine, provided you don't jostle the dowel. Okay. That was a question from juror 68. Mr. Rucker, anything else you wanted us to touch on logistically?
I do one additional thing.
All right. Thank you. You may recall testimony about an investigative incision that was made to the front of the back of the front seat. You may see that. That is a defect caused by someone who is investigating the case. The dowel doesn't go through that, but you should draw no conclusions, have no concerns about the fact that there's this incision that was made in the seat. If you are looking at the front side of the back of the front passenger seat. And with that, I'm going to have you all go back to the jury room. It is cold down there, so if you have additional jackets that you brought with you, put them on. If you don't, like I said, if it gets too cold, you let a deputy know, and we'll get you to a warmer place until either it's your turn to take a look at the vehicle, if you want to look at it, or if you're already done, we'll get you back up here out of the chill. It's going to be a few minutes before everyone's set up down there, so don't think we forgot about you. But if you want to have a snack or something, go in the jury room and do that. Deputy King will collect you. We'll still have a lunch break when we're done with all this, because the attorneys and the court reporter need one as well. You're not going to know when that ends, so if you come back up here a little early, don't head out for your lunch break, because you're not going to know when you need to be back. We'll reconvene when the jury view is complete to say, here's what's next. Let me give you some numbers now. Hopefully you still remember your juror numbers. Jurors 5, 7, 10, 18, 20, 36, 38, and 57. That's 8. That's 8 people. Do you all recognize your numbers? You still remember them? Okay, you're gonna go on that first group, so when Deputy Kane says, rally up, you follow Deputy Kane, or whomever it is, to get on the elevator, you'll go down. And then he or a colleague will be back soon after that to get the remaining 7. That'll be all 15 of you, and we will proceed from there. We'll see you in a little bit. You can go with Deputy Kane back to the jury.
All rise for the jury.
So, Deputy Kane, what's the best way for us to get everyone else? I can get down there. I'm happy to bring some of the folks down there. I need to go get a jacket also. So, how would you like to wait till we've got everyone here? I'm not talking about jurors, but lawyers, Mr. McIver, court reporter. Should we all start here and you get us down there, or what?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay. All right, so let's be back in here in 3 or 4 minutes with whatever it is you want to bring with you down to the basement. Does that give you enough time? 5 minutes? Yes. Go ahead, start. Okay, great. All right, we'll be back down here, ready to go.